Jessica Pegula just expressed what everyone was thinking, and the WTA was unable to respond. Eala was pushed into a tiny court. The most influential lady in women's tennis governance finally lost it when thousands of fans were barred outdoors. This was more than just a scheduling error. This was a trend. An unforgivable, established pattern that keeps happening. One that has been taking place in Melbourne, Miami, Dubai, and anywhere else Alexandra Eala dares to appear and become the most talked about player on the planet. Furthermore, when someone with Jessica Pegula's influence and position chooses to speak up, there is more than just a dispute, there is a reckoning. Keep watching because you will realize just how profound this is by the end of the video. You can't comprehend the rage, so let's start over. Pegula's annoyance is beyond your comprehension. And unless you know exactly who Alexandra Eala is and what she has done to the sport in just 12 months, you will not be able to comprehend why millions of fans worldwide are currently incensed at the WTA. The age of Alexandra Eala is 20. Her arrival was noisy, and she is from the Philippines. Eala embarked on one of the most spectacular runs in women's tennis history in March 2025 while playing as a wild card at the Miami Open. Eala had little influence over WTA rankings and no seed at all. She defeated Jelena Oopino. Madison Keys was defeated by her. She defeated the two-time defending world number 1, Egish Swiatek. She continued to win match after match on the biggest hardcourt platform outside of the Grand Slams. She continued to dismantle players who were higher in the rankings. She persisted in converting critics into believers. She was no longer a wild card in spirit by the time she took the court for her semi-final matchup with Jessica Pegula. She was the tournament's main character. So far in the 2025 season, she has undoubtedly been the main character. Pegula prevailed in that contest, but not without a fight. Even so, Eala gave the tennis community something it hadn't experienced in a long time. True electrifying excitement that is impossible to ignore. You might learn everything from the numbers that followed her around. Eala was chosen by 79% of tennis fans over Coco Gauff and 89% over Emma Raducanu in a Talking Point fan poll. Not only was she well-liked, but she was also changing the demographics of tennis viewers. Filipino communities all over the world were purchasing tickets, making travel arrangements, and staying up until 2 in the morning to see her perform. People came wherever Eala went. Completely stop. Thus, this is the query that initiates the entire narrative. What would you do if you had the most well-liked player in women's tennis, one who was drawing millions of new fans to your sport, selling out venues and making headlines? She would receive the largest court from you. You would shine the brightest lights on her. Every time, you would highlight her. That is not what the WTA did. And that's when things start to go apart. Are you still here? Good, because that's when things became really unbelievable. One of the 4 most prominent tennis tournaments in the world, the Australian Open, is held in Melbourne Park in January 2026. After an incredible 2025 season that saw her advance to the Miami Open semifinals, win the US Open in the first round, become the first Filipino to win a match at a Grand Slam in the Open era, and see her ranking soar, Alexandra Eala makes her Australian Open main draw debut at Melbourne Park. For the millions of Filipino tennis fans who have followed, applauded, and cried with her through every turn of 2025, this is a historic moment. Not just for her, but for the entire nation. Of all Australian cities, Melbourne boasts one of the biggest Filipino populations. For weeks, everyone had been discussing this match. Supporters had scheduled their travels. Some had put in hours of driving. The order of play was then made public by the Australian Open. Court Case Eala vs Alicia Park 6. Court 6. Rod Laver Arena, no. Margaret Court Arena, no. John Cain Arena, no. Court 6. A medium-sized space without a roof and little seating. Like a peaceful part of a neighborhood you'd pass by without seeing, it's situated inside Melbourne Park. The response came right away. One of the most well-known tennis arenas in the world, Rod Laver Arena, was passed by the long line that developed outside Court 6. In the afternoon sun, hundreds and eventually thousands of people stood shoulder to shoulder in the hopes and prayers that they would be able to enter. Many didn't. Outside the court, they were made to stand around large screens in spaces that were, incidentally, crammed with people. Fans watched their hero on a television screen in a parking lot after traveling 12 hours from Sydney simply to be there in person. The web didn't hold back either. WTA ought to have conducted more thorough research. They ought to have pushed for a better platform because they are aware of Eala's appeal. She should easily be on an arena court, an admirer commented. One fan just called the decision dumb and said it was unforgivable to ever repeat it, another fan wrote. Stories of Filipino fans who had never been to a tennis match before but had gone particularly because Eala was playing and were turned away at the entrance went viral on Reddit. Furthermore, this was not an isolated error. That's what matters most. This has previously occurred and would do so once again. Here's why this narrative is more significant than a single poor scheduling decision at a single tournament. Due to the fact that the Australian Open incident was not a singular instance. It was the most recent development in a tale that had been developing for more than a year. Even though Eala attracted some of the biggest audiences on tour, she was routinely put on secondary courts at odd times during several tournaments through 2025. Even though the spectators were packed for her semi-final match against Pegula at the Miami Open, it was not the day's main event in terms of scheduling consideration. The WTA Tour had a schedule conflict in Dubai that was so blatant that even they had to make the necessary corrections. Following intense fan backlash, they ultimately scheduled Eala for the final match on center court on February 17, the sport's most coveted time slot, and were praised straight away for finally getting it right. The WTA Tour finally makes the correct Eala X schedule decision after fan criticism, was the headline of one outlet's piece. Go over that headline once more. Lastly, following complaints from fans. This indicates that in order to persuade organizers to place their most well-liked attraction on their most noticeable stage, a surge of public fury was needed. Not common sense, business logic, or a simple analysis of ticket sales. Even after that adjustment in Dubai, the WTA faltered once again when Eala was assigned to start the quarterfinals evening session instead of ending it. It would destroy Alina Svitolina's crowd for the subsequent match, according to analysts and fans. Former world number 3 Svitolina, a 4-time WTA 1000 champion, and a formidable champion, would be entering a court that is empty as Eala's supporters leave. Eala's followers in the Philippines will have to watch after 1 in the morning due to the rescheduled time slot. Many people were harmed by a single scheduling decision. That's what occurs when you don't have a well-thought-out plan for handling your biggest celebrity. And because Jessica Pegula wasn't merely a top player observing things from the sidelines, someone with actual authority was now paying attention in a visible and public manner. She was going to speak up as the chair of the WTA's own Tour Architecture Council. Since Jessica Pegula is more than just a rival or a bystander in this tale, let's discuss who she truly is. She is the most qualified individual in women's tennis to discuss this topic. Pegula was named the head of the Tour Architecture Council, a new 13-member group that was established in early 2026 by WTA Tour chair Valerie Camilillo. The council's primary responsibility was to study the women's tennis schedule, scheduling procedures, ranking point system, and required participation requirements. Camillo claims that Pegula was selected because of her careful, cooperative style and her 6 years on the WTA Player Council. In other words, she is more than just an opinionated player. When it comes to the WTA's decision-making process, she is the player's official voice. Furthermore, Pegula had already begun to voice her concerns about systemic issues, to her great credit. She and Madison Keys had publicly criticized the WTA's absurd schedule, which was so full that 25 of the 43 main draw participants in Dubai in early 2026 either retired mid-match or withdrew before the event. In order to save her health, she personally left Doha. After 5 games in 5 days, she won Dubai. The physical cost is known to her. She is aware of the disarray in the organization. She has experienced it. Pegula was not striking up a fresh discussion when she observed what had occurred to Eala once more. The WTA had been refusing to truly have one, and she was carrying on with it. The fact that Eala was scheduled on court 6 at the Australian Open, that she was frequently placed on subsidiary stages, and that the most well-liked player in women's tennis was not treated like the valuable asset that she was. All of these were components of the same flawed system that Pegula's council was established to address. This time, the response was distinct because it had a name. Not just Reddit threads, not just Twitter fans. As he considered the Eala scenario, the chair of the WTA's own Reform Commission declared, "This is unacceptable. This needs to change, and the WTA couldn't just ignore it." This is the part, though, that no one is discussing. The true cause of this controversy's explosive growth, which is directly related to the issues facing women's tennis going forward. You must comprehend the business of what AYA stands for in order to fully see why this dispute is significant beyond the indignation cycle. In 2025, there were 27.3 million tennis players in the US alone. Women's tennis is becoming more and more popular worldwide. However, expanding it further, especially in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, especially in regions that the WTA has historically found difficult to enter, calls for precisely what AYA offers organically, naturally, and without the WTA having to spend a single penny on marketing. A celebrity who will be followed everywhere by a sizable, fervent, and devoted fan base. It is not necessary to persuade Filipino tennis enthusiasts to appreciate the sport. They already adore it. She is the reason they adore it. They left Sydney and traveled for 12 hours. They remained up until 1 in the morning. They stood in line outside the court for hours. 6. They purchased tickets to tournaments in Dubai and occupied center court in a manner that attracted the attention of Coco Gauff, one of the best young players in the world, who made public remarks about it. In her post-match interview, Gauff sincerely apologized to Eala's supporters for keeping them waiting for so long. This player has that kind of power, and the WTA keeps making mistakes with it. Because Eala's fanbase is not a passive audience, there is a great deal of risk involved. They don't go home in silence when they are treated disrespectfully, when thousands of people arrive and are turned away at the gate. They remember, they push back, they organize, and they post. International media covered the Australian Open scheduling incident. Major sports media sources grabbed it up. It turned into a discussion about institutional incompetence on the part of the organization tasked with advancing tennis, rather than A-list tennis, which is remarkable. The dynamic changes as a result of Pegula's intervention because more people than simply fans are now demanding accountability. We need to do better by this player and by this sport, says a woman seated at the table who is the WTA's own reform chair and one of the top 5 players. Whether the WTA pays attention before the harm is irreparable is the question. This is not the end of the narrative. The Tour Architecture Council of the WTA is still meeting. The 2026 season is not yet complete. Eala continues to climb. The next time a scheduling decision needs to be made, an organizer will be able to determine whether women's tennis has learned from this experience or has decided to repeat it by looking at the draw and choosing where to place the player for whom thousands of people have already purchased tickets. Was this a straightforward error or an indication of how highly the sport regards its non-Western stars? Leave a comment with your response. We would like to hear your thoughts. This is the bottom line. Alexandra Eala is more than just a rising celebrity. She represents a cultural turning point. Additionally, Jessica Pegula ensured that the next order of play could not silently bury that moment by speaking up with her voice, platform, and position. The WTA has been given the opportunity to make this right. The next chapter in women's tennis will be determined by whether or not they accept it. If you found this video thought-provoking, click subscribe now to enable notifications and be the first to know when the next installment of the Eala tale is released. Every dispute, every comeback, and every moment that women's tennis doesn't want you to see is covered by us. See you in the upcoming